So it's 2018, I'm in my engineering degree and I'm about to take a final exam for my computing class. So this semester, I'm standing outside the room, ready to walk in to take the exam. And I've studied hard for this exam. This is my first semester of university. I'm doing an engineering degree, like I said. And I have not turned up to any of the classes because I went to the first week of classes and to be honest, they weren't really helping me at all. I thought, look, I can learn this way better on my own. If I go home and I simply just learn this material on my own, I don't need to come to these classes. I'm not a big fan of this teacher anyway. You know, what's the point of coming here? So I've pretty much self-studied this entire course and I'm a bit scared, not gonna lie, because this is my first semester of university and I don't know if I've made a massive mistake trying to do this or if I'm a genius by saving my time not having to go to, I think, 3 hours of lectures a week. Anyway, so I'm standing outside this exam room. I'm kind of just like waiting for the exam to start and somebody's there nearby. He's holding some papers. And so I think, okay, this is a fellow student. I'm just gonna ask him how he's feeling about the exam. You know, I haven't met anyone in my classes because I literally haven't even gone to class. So I'm gonna talk to this guy, see what he thinks about the exam. Hopefully he can build a bit of my confidence that I'm not screwed. So I go up to him and I'm like, hey, you know, I can't remember exactly what I said, but I was like, you ready to do this exam? How are you feeling? And what he ends up telling me is hey, I'm the teacher, I'm the lecturer. So I thought this guy was a student. Turns out he was the lecturer of the class. He was literally the teacher of the class and he was standing there waiting to let us in to do the exam. So I'm seeing the teacher for the first time and I mistook him for a student. So the reason I'm telling you this is because so many students are under the belief that you have to go to class to do, by the way, I ended up getting an A in that subject. Now, I'm flexing a little bit here because I want to teach you. Hopefully I can help you realize that a big false belief that many students have is they think that they have to go to class to do well. They think, oh, it's 9, like I remember students would drag themselves to class at 9 a.m. like, oh, I gotta go to class, guys. You know, otherwise I'm gonna fail, I'm gonna fall behind. But for most of my classes in university, I did not go to lectures. And for so many of my classes in university, I didn't even watch the lecture because I simply learned how to learn. When you learn the science of learning, when you learn how learning actually happens, you can actually honestly learn better on your own than going to classes. Like I could study an entire week's worth of material in like an hour when it would have taken me 4 hours in class because I would have had to sit through 3 hours of lectures, then revise the material on my own. So I've got a couple principles here that I want to mention about how I managed to get away with this. Now, first thing I want to mention here is I'm not telling you to skip class. You know, if you find class helps you, go. But if you're going to class and you're, on your phone, you're not even paying attention, you might want to try some of these things out. Some people, they need the class as discipline. It's like if the class pushes them to do something, it pushes them to learn. So if that's your situation, go ahead. The other thing you can do is you can apply these principles and you can do what's called pre-learning. So pre-learning is something that I did sometimes where basically you learn some of the material before you go to class and it makes the class a lot easier because you're essentially just revising the material. So you don't have to focus as intensely and also it's like repetition. It's revising the material. It'll go deeper into your mind. It'll be more ingrained. You'll learn it better. So let me start going through these tips here. Okay, let's see what I've got. Okay, so the other thing, by the way, I didn't take notes in university. People are shocked when I tell them this, but I didn't take notes. I barely took notes. I had no notebooks where I was writing notes. I didn't take any drugs that help you focus. Absolutely not. I didn't do tutoring. I didn't do any of that. I didn't go to class. You just need to know how to learn. I didn't watch the lectures for a lot of classes, like I said. Okay, so the first tip I want to give you here is that lecture slides are usually good enough. So this is what I used to do. I used to just scroll through the lecture slides. So if you're in high school, maybe go through the textbook or something. But honestly, just scrolling through the lecture slides in a lot of classes, they will teach you everything you need to know. The teacher would sort of just explain what was on the lecture slides, but you could get all that knowledge literally just by reading the lecture slides. Like the lecture would say, like the slide would say, like for example, you know, I don't know what an example is. This is this rule or whatever, and the teacher would just like repeat it. So you could have learned that material in like 10 seconds, and the teacher would have taken like 10 minutes to go over that thing. Now, I will explain some subjects the lecture slides are worse. The lecture slides are a bit more difficult to learn, but for the classes where the lecture slides are good enough, honestly, you can just learn straight from them. Because there's something that I like to call the 7 repetition rule. 7 is just sort of an arbitrary number. I can't even remember where I got it. But the first repetition, there's a book called Make It Stick, where it talks about the scientific principles of learning. And one of the principles that they give is repetition. To learn something, you have to repeat it over and over and over again. You can't, if you're trying to memorize a word in a foreign language, you're trying to learn the word for, let's say, pen in English, pen. You can't just look at it once. You need to look at it again and again and again. You need repetition over periods of time. That's how you learn. So when you go to a lecture, that's 1 repetition. The lecture is 1 repetition. But the reality is you're probably going to go to the lecture and you're probably going to have to revise it again at home anyway, because you're going to need more repetitions. So this is why I call it the 7 repetition rule. In general, you need about 7 spaced repetitions of something to learn it. So the lecture is only the first repetition. And usually the first repetition is the most confusing. Whenever I would look at something for the first time, whenever I would open a lecture slide pack for the first time, I was doing engineering, by the way, so these subjects were very, very difficult, very, very mathematical. I would have no idea what I was looking at. There would be formulas everywhere. There would be like random concepts everywhere. That first repetition was literally just kind of like priming my brain. I didn't even understand anything I was looking at. So you might try to do this like I told you, and you might, by the way, again, I want to re-emphasize this. I'm not telling you to skip class. Hopefully take these as principles how to learn better. If you feel like you can skip class, go ahead. But please, if you go to class already, keep going to class. Do not skip until you're confident you can do this. Because I don't want people skipping classes and then failing because of what I'm telling you. I'm literally just telling you principles to learn, okay? So 7 repetition rule. The first time you go over some slides, you're probably gonna have no idea what you're looking at. The first time you sit in a lecture, chances are you're gonna have no idea what you're listening to. By the way, I'm actually not that good of a learner. I'm a pretty slow learner. A big reason, not gonna lie, that I didn't go to lectures was I was such a slow learner that I would literally get lost in class. I would start daydreaming, I would think about other things. I could not focus in class. Most students were listening to lectures on like 3 times speed. If I was watching a lecture, I had to watch it on 1 time speed. So I'm actually a pretty slow learner. I'm not gifted when it comes to learning. So 7 repetition rule. The first time I would look over a lecture, I would be confused. I would have no idea what was going on. But if you just keep repeating, if you keep turning up, it's kind of like, I'm trying to think of an analogy. You know how like there's a video game map, and at first the video game map is completely black. Then the first time you scan over it, it clears up a little bit. Third time you scan over it, it clears up a little bit. 4th time it clears up a little bit. 7th time you scan over it, it clears up and you can see everything clearly. It's like you're clearing the fog, you're pushing through, clearing the fog slowly. That feeling of having no idea what you're looking at is normal. It's a part of the learning process. I always experienced it. So you need to keep turning up, keep trying, and eventually things will make sense. So another principle here of learning, that I learned from that book, Make It Stick. When you're learning the lecture slides, when you're reading the textbook, when you're watching the lecture, focus on understanding. Don't focus on trying to get this stuff into your mind right now. Focus on just understanding what you're looking at. So it might be slow. Sometimes I'll spend like 20 minutes on one slide and then the next slide will take me like 10 seconds. Focus on understanding what you're looking at. Because if you understand something from the bottom up, you actually understand, like you understand the formula, how it's used and everything. For example, it's much easier to memorize. Memorizing becomes difficult when you sort of just memorize something just like this. Right? Like for example, I'm trying to think of an example. Can't think of an example right now, but if you understand something, you're much more likely to memorize it. That's the first thing. The second thing is you learn the material. I mean, like to be able to answer the questions in the exam, you have to understand the material, right? So when you're doing these repetitions, don't focus on like memorizing. Don't focus on cramming it into your mind. Take your time. I literally am so slow with this. I literally take my time and I focus on understanding. Because understanding cannot be rushed. You can't go like, oh brain, understand faster. I think of it as like, when the learning process is a process that you have to surrender to. That's how I think of it. We try to force learning. We try to force things into our mind. We try to repeat our notes over and over again to force it into our mind. But I think of learning as this process that you have to surrender to. It might take you 20 minutes to understand a slide. It might take you 5 minutes. You can't control it. So let me give you a realistic example. I might do one run through of the lecture slides and I have no idea what I'm looking at. Then I do a second run through where I go a bit slower and I focus on understanding. Then maybe I spend like 20 minutes just trying to understand the first 2 slides. And maybe after 20 minutes, I still don't fully understand them, but I move on, that's fine. And then the next couple slides I understand pretty fast. And then I might come back to those first 2 times, and since I've given those slides a bit of time to marinate, I will understand them better the second time. So that's the next principle I want to give you here. Spaced repetition. Sometimes you won't understand something for the first time, but there's this principle. There's this book called, what's it called? I think it's called A Mind for Numbers. I can't remember what it's called exactly. It's a book on how to learn science, math, difficult subjects, but this principle applies for all subjects. There are 2 modes of learning that you do. There's, what's it called? Let me just check. I wrote it down somewhere. It's called diffuse mode. Actually, let me just double check. I want to get this correct. It's called focus mode and diffuse mode. So focus mode is when you're focusing, you're trying to solve problems, you're solving problems. And diffuse mode is when you step away from the problems, when you go for a walk, when you allow the material to digest in your brain. So learning doesn't actually happen when you're looking at the slides. Learning happens when you go to sleep. Learning happens when you go for a walk after your study session. So if you try to understand the slides, again, 7 repetition rule. When you try to understand the textbook, again, I'm not telling you to skip class. This is general principles. When you're trying to understand something and you don't understand it, that's normal, that's fine. Sometimes you have to step away from it. So like I said, 20 minutes for the first 2 slides. I have no idea what I'm looking at. I move on. But I come back to it and I do my second repetition. And suddenly I understand it because I let it marinate. I gave it some time. This is why the lecture, people get frustrated because they're not learning in lectures. A lecture is just the first repetition, right? A lecture is just the first repetition. Sometimes it takes multiple repetitions. Spaced repetition, right? You have to give it space. You have to let it marinate. That's why spaced repetition is so important, because you're letting it marinate. By the way, I don't think marinate is the best word here to use, but yeah, you're essentially letting the knowledge marinate in the electrical reactions of your neurons. I'm just talking nonsense here. Don't take that as real science. But focus on understanding. Okay, the next tip I want to give you here is to use multiple sources. So the classes where I went to, there are a few subjects in university where I actually went to the class. For example, there was one called, it was a computer science class. It was called Foundations of Algorithms, I think, because the teacher was so good. Signals and Systems, the teacher was so good. Foundations of Electrical, no, what's it called? Probability and Random Models, teacher so good. What else? Linguistics, I did a linguistics subject, teacher so good. So if your teacher is legendary, he's really good, go to class. Because another principle of learning, we learn better through emotion. When there's emotion involved in learning, for example, the teacher gives excitement to the class, the teacher makes the subject exciting, interesting, he's a good teacher, you're gonna learn better. So if you've actually genuinely got a good teacher, I should have mentioned this in the beginning, by the way, a big reason I didn't go to lectures was because the teacher was terrible. But if you've actually got a good teacher, it can be worth it to go to lectures. But the tip I want to give you is use multiple sources. The lecture is not the only way. We think we have to go to lectures to learn the material because we're scared we're going to miss something. We're like, oh no, what if I miss a key detail from the subject? As long as you're following the syllabus, as long as you're learning everything in the lecture slides, as long as you're doing the questions, the past papers, all that stuff, you're not going to miss anything. The teacher's not going to say any like secret thing that's missed, at least in my experience. Again, I'm not telling you to skip class. Please just take this as learning principles. But the next thing I want to tell you is to use multiple sources. So your teacher yapping in the classroom is one source. For me, I would use the lecture slides, ChatGPT. I didn't really have ChatGPT much in my university days, but ChatGPT can be a good way to do it. So like I said, open up your lecture slides, focus on understanding, and use multiple sources. So you're using multiple sources to understand. So let's say you're doing a slide on the Laplace transform, I don't know. Maybe you go to YouTube. YouTube's an amazing source, and you find like a video that begins in English, has an English title, is on an English concept, and it gives you hope for the first 30 seconds that it's in English, and suddenly the guy starts speaking Hindi for the rest of the video. Maybe you go watch a video like that on YouTube. Jokes. But maybe you go to YouTube and you watch a video. Maybe you go to ChatGPT and use it to help you understand the material. Maybe YouTube's a big one, by the way. For so many subjects, there are literally people who are so good at teaching who literally just teach the entire subject. If you're in high school, you are so lucky because there's literally playlists of videos where they literally teach you the subject. If you're in university, the deeper I got into university, into my engineering degree, the more difficult it was to find material online. That's why I said about the Indian videos, because a lot of subjects, it was only like videos in Hindi. It was very difficult to find ones in English, I think. But there are many subjects where there's so much material online. Use Google, use multiple sources, because when you're using all these different sources, you get different perspectives. And understanding is nothing but getting a bunch of different perspectives and coming to the conclusion in your own mind. So the lecturer is one perspective. Maybe your friends in class are another perspective. You using your brain, you using your intellect is another perspective. YouTube, use multiple sources. That's the next tip I want to give you. Okay, the next tip I want to give you here is a lot of the subject is useless. So there is a skill you can develop in university. Now, honestly, the skill might be, I'm very careful when I give you this because I don't want you to mess up. But you need to understand what is going to be assessed. So students make this mistake where as long as the teacher presents something to them, they cram it into their mind, they try to memorize it. But here's what I realized from a couple things. By the way, I never went to tutorials as well. First of all, teachers tend to give you so many questions. The end of the textbook tends to have so many questions. But the first thing I realized is so many practice questions that the teacher gives you, so many practice questions that are in the textbook are so easy that you're not even learning anything, or they're not even exam style questions. Sometimes in a subject, entire weeks are not even assessed. There was this subject I did called declarative programming, and the final exam was a coding exam, but the last 6 weeks of the subject were non-coding material. So I took a massive risk here. Now, I don't recommend doing this. I took a massive risk and I didn't even study those last 6 weeks because I thought, wait a minute, how can this even be assessed? The exam is 100% coding. It's literally done on a computer. How can this be assessed? And I took the risk and it paid off because that material, the rest of the class all studied that material, and it was the hardest material of the subject as well. And I didn't do it. Now that's an extreme example, but there are some weeks that literally they're not even assessed, for example. Some weeks literally only assessed in the assessments. So if you can develop this skill of knowing what to skip, like sometimes they give huge explanations on certain things and you don't need to know those things. The best way to know is to look at the assessments, look at past papers. Past paper questions will tell you everything you need to know in the subject. That's why I always start with past papers. I begin with past papers and I use it as a guide to tell me what I need to know in the subject. Now, some subjects you won't have access to many past papers, so it is going to be more difficult. But if you have the luxury of having a ton of past papers, may as well use them. So that's a bit of a weird tip. I never went to office hours, by the way. Here I'm just saying everything I skipped. I don't recommend doing that. But okay. Final tip I want to give you here is focus on understanding 7 repetition rule, but don't forget the golden technique when it comes to studying. The most important thing you need to know that I always talk about is active recall. Now I say this because all the research out there proves that active recall, testing yourself, is the best study technique. If you do it, you will study less, you will remember better. So as you're focused on understanding the slides, what I do is I just test myself on the material. I talk out loud. Do I understand this? Do I understand this? Can I teach this? Can I explain it? The Feynman technique, which is you learn by teaching. Do I understand this? And so I told you I didn't take notes because most of my learning happened in 2 ways. Number 1, practice questions. So for maths, science, these procedural type subjects where you need to know how to solve problems, I did a ton of practice questions. But for those subjects where you sort of need to memorize stuff, let's say for example economics, I made my own questions. So for me, economics in high school, I was so lucky that the syllabus was literally, it told you everything you needed to know. So I just took everything I needed to know, put it onto paper, and I attempted to answer every single question. So testing yourself, asking yourself questions on the material. By the way, this is some of the best medical students out there. This is what they do. Instead of taking notes, they write questions. They have this huge bank of questions that they've made, and their revision is literally just testing themselves on the questions. I might make a whole video about this, about how I got away with not taking notes in university. But for those memorization type subjects, you can just make a bunch of questions. And the questions that you find easy, highlight them in yellow. The questions that you find difficult, highlight them in red. And just keep going through the questions over and over again, spaced repetition, until you can answer every single question. Because science, I don't want to go through the science here, but when you actively recall, when you test yourself, when you try to actually retrieve the material out of your mind, it takes effort, so it tells your brain that this stuff is important to know, it's important to learn, because you're using effort to actually recall it, right? Recognizing something is different from being able to recall it. You might be able to read through an entire textbook and recognize everything and be like, yep, this makes sense. But you won't be able to actually answer any questions because you can't recall it. You can only recognize it. Maybe I'll be able to give you a map of a country or something and you'll instantly recognize it, but you won't be able to draw it from scratch. So there's a difference between recognition and recalling. It's called the recognition illusion. So don't fall for the recognition illusion. So anything I'm missing here? No, again, disclaimer, please go to your classes. If you're still going to classes, don't skip them. But try these principles and just understand that this belief that going to class is the only way to learn is not true. Now, I'm very hesitant to say this because a lot of students, they require the class for discipline. So take this as a guide on how to learn subjects. Don't take this as a guide on how to skip your classes and go partying every night. Don't take this as a guide to do that. Actually, yeah, if you're watching this video because you want to skip class and go partying, you've misunderstood this video. Use this as a learning guide. So hopefully that helped. If you want to ask me anything, if you want to talk to me, I reply to all messages on Instagram. Check out the description. But apart from that, see you later.